Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome. We're just giving it a moment to build up critical mass and let everyone get settled into this virtual learning space. We're so glad to have you here. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am proud to be the founder and lead principal consultant at NWC. I wish to shout out the NWC team for working so tirelessly week after week to bring this virtual production experience to each of you so that we can learn with and from each other in community. We know that we celebrated Juneteenth this week, and so I also want to acknowledge that and say happy Juneteenth to each of you. I hope that you found meaningful ways to reflect on that day, and perhaps you still are. I know I am. You may see my Juneteenth t-shirt that I'm wearing today. I want to also welcome those who are joining us from LinkedIn Live. We know that many individuals decide to join us in that capacity, maybe instead of being a part of the Zoom community. And either way, we're so glad that you're with us. We do ask that you leverage the comment section if you're on LinkedIn Live. We are watching that closely and bringing those discussions into our Zoom chat area as well. And if you are joining us, please go to the comment section or the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always a treat for us to be able to see where our guests are located. And we're always pleased to know that we have not only a great deal of individuals that join us from within the US, but also outside of the US. And so that is incredibly exciting for us. At NWC, we do value disability inclusion, and as such, we have the closed caption that has been enabled for those who could benefit from it. So I want to make sure that you are aware of that. And as we're thinking about Juneteenth, let us know in the chat, what did you do to honor and recognize Juneteenth? Let us know what your plans were into the chat. If you also desire for this community to connect with you beyond this hour of time, then I encourage you to place your LinkedIn information into the chat if you're joining us by Zoom. And that just lets us know that you're willing to receive some connection requests from those that are part of this community. I certainly would value being connected to each of you. And so my team will place my LinkedIn information into the chat, and I look forward to connecting with you there. I also want to share that June is Caribbean Heritage Month for those of you who may not be aware of that. So lots going on this month, lots to celebrate. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect dialogue of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, all the things that fall under that broad umbrella with leadership and business. And we hope you enjoy today's show. Let the conversations begin indeed, and that is precisely what we're about to do. If you're just tuning in, you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast. I am Dr. Nika White, your host. My pronouns, she, her, hers. Really excited to engage with you all today and have you to be a part of our show. We know that it is going to be rich conversation, and we look forward to learning with and from each of you. So we are still in the month of June, and as such, we want to make sure that as we do every single week, we recognize some national observances, not to say that this is the only month to be able to support those communities, but just to make sure we're bringing recognition to the greater intentionality that each of us should have around standing in solidarity with communities that have historically been marginalized, disenfranchised. And so today, we want to make sure that we are reminding each of us that June is Pride Month. So make sure you're doing something to support the LGBTQIA+ community. I also want to let you know that if you've been following us, you know that LinkedIn Learning has been a part of our offerings. We do have a number of courses that are already out there where I have the honor of serving as the instructor. There's 3 to be precise that are available. There is a 4th one that is in post-production. We'll be releasing soon. And I can't release the actual title of the course, but let me tell you that if you are someone who's really feeling a lot of energy around making sure that workplace knows how to navigate civil discourse, knows how to decipher the difference between free speech and hate speech, you're going to want to pay attention to the release date of this next course, because we're getting into all of that. And with this being an election year and so many other social complex issues that we're faced with, I think it's an important topic, and I want you all to be ahead of it. So make sure you keep a watch on the release date for course number 4. One of the things that we do at NWC is we like to make sure that we are finding ways for people to deepen their knowledge and understanding of all things DEIB. And so we produce a lot of content through our Inclusion Uncomplicated videos, through articles and blogs. And we do have a blog that was released recently, and it is Honoring the Past, Empowering the Future. And it's all about why Black history matters, why events like Juneteenth matter, and just understanding the historical, all the historical aspects of it, so that we can make sure that we're putting that into the right context of how we move forward. And so we're going to place a link to that blog. There's also a white paper that aligns with the same topic. We'll share that as well. And this is just a courtesy as another tool to put into your toolbox as we continue to learn and grow. Also want to remind you that at NWC, we have multiple ways of connecting with our community. And so if you are interested in being a part of our text campaign, this is another way that we are making sure that information and opportunities is accessible to you. We've had a number of folks from our community to already sign up for it. We will not inundate you, but we do know that there have been times where people have reached out to say, I don't want to miss who's coming up on Intentional Conversations. So how can I make sure that I'm on top of that? And so if you're not on our distribution list and you want to be, let us know. Now, if you enjoy Intentional Conversations, either our podcast or our podcast, because you know that we do extract the audio and we make it available in podcast capacity for those who like to get their content that way, I want you to let us know that. We're going to place a link into the chat, which is a quick 2 to 3 minute survey that allows you to be able to give us your input. And that input is very valuable to us. We refine how in which we're bringing this experience to the broader community. And so we want your feedback. And we will also place that link again at the end of today's show into the chat so that you can also have it before we close out today's show. So we want to hear from you. Thank you so much. We also want to hear from you if you have recommendations. We are booked out almost through the entire year, but we do have a couple slots open for Q4. So if you know of someone that you think would great value to this community, let us know. We want to be able to connect with them. And many of our guest co-hosts have come by way of recommendations from you. And so we're very grateful for that. You can simply send those recommendations to my colleague, Amora Carter, and her email is amora@nikawhite.com. Thank you in advance for that. Don't forget, we do have Intentional Conversations as a podcast as well. So now, before I get to a formal introduction of today's guest co-host, I would like to give you a little bit of what you have to look forward to in terms of upcoming guest co-hosts that are going to be on the Intentional Conversations VodCast. Rounding us out the month of June on the 28th, we'll have Dr. Jade Singleton. So mark your calendars for that. Make sure you're joining us. I do want you to know that the first Friday of July, we will not be here. Intentional Conversations will not take place on that particular day. It is, of course, the week of July the 4th, and many people take long holiday weekend vacations, or maybe you're celebrating with friends and family. And so we will not be here that day. Want to make sure we remind you of that. But then we will be back on the 12th with Yad Evangelo Nasser, and I look forward to you hearing from Yad. He is doing some wonderful work and is a consultant partner with NWC, and I just look forward to him sharing with this community. And then middle of June, we have Sanyatini Dasgupta, and that's going to be on the 19th. And so I hope you also will join us for that particular Intentional Conversations. Now, it does me great pleasure to take a moment to shift us now and get you to become acquainted and familiar with today's guest co-host. One of the things I like to do here on Intentional Conversations VodCast is read the official bio of our guest co-host. To me, it's a way of showing respect and giving you all, as our community and audience, an opportunity to understand some of the accolades, the experiences, the credentials in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so today, will be no different. I am so delighted to have Dr. Nicole Price. And Dr. Nicole Price, she gets it. Price is dedicated to pushing her own limits and committed to developing her empathy muscle. Her logical results-focused technical background combined to enhance her objective approach to solving process problems, flipping dilemmas, and generating greater levels of understanding. Through leadership development, coaching, consulting, keynotes, and other resources, Dr. Price enables others to reach their goals by using empathy, not despite empathy. Her energetic and engaging sessions have participants with strategies and specific tools that they can apply right away. Her lively presentation style garners rave reviews and very often invitations to return. Dr. Price received her BS in chemical engineering from North Carolina A&T University, her master's degree in adult education from Park University, her doctorate in leadership and management from Capella University, and completed postdoctoral studies at Stanford University. For more information about Dr. Price's organization and the full list of programs offered, you can visit her website, which we will place in the chat, and it is livelyparadox.com. What I want you to do at this time, podcast community, is find those emojis, those reactions, words of affirmation, whatever it is, place them into the chat. Let's let our guest co-host know how appreciative we are for her to be sharing space and time with us today. She is joining us today's conversation from Kansas City, Missouri, and we're just so grateful. And so before I release you, Dr. Nicole, to greet this audience in your own way, we have a tradition here. And that tradition is we would love for our guest co-host to indulge us by sharing something that we would not know about them from hearing your bio, which we just did, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. Welcome. So glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Nika. If I could share one thing that I think is unique about me, it would be that if I could do any job other than the one I have, it would be to be a comedian.
Oh my gosh, I so love that. Now, I have been known to put people on the spot, right? But I won't do that in this particular moment in time because, comedy, at least from my outside looking in lens, you have to be practiced at that. It's not something that's just, you just pull out of the air. Although I'm sure that some people can. I don't know where you fit on that spectrum, but we will spare you. But don't be surprised if maybe sometime during this hour, I'll come back to that, okay?
Well, my hope is that I'll have an opportunity to tell some jokes while we're together.
Oh my God. Listen, you have just walked into something, and I appreciate that invitation because we are not going to let that pass by. And so I will start by just talking about Juneteenth because, of course, it's this week. I'm wearing my shirt, Juneteenth, 1865, free-ish, and that's relative. Whole unpacking can take place around the free-ish, but it is really interesting to me to watch year after year, especially in the past, decade, how the community at large has increased, or maybe in some regards, people feel like they have decreased their enthusiasm for Juneteenth. Well, what are you seeing that has been really unique that you feel that's important just to socialize around how people are showing up to now this holiday that at one point in time, a lot of people didn't even know about, many people didn't know about?
What I'm excited about is that Wednesday night, I got an opportunity to hear Dr. Opal Lee,
Oh,
who is named the grandmother of Juneteenth, and she's
yes.
97 years old. And she was in the audience at a convention I was attending in Dallas. And she was quoted, she said, "Each of us should make ourselves a committee of one and decide that we're going to focus on at least something to make this world a better place than we found it." And I was so inspired to see her walk up on stage at 97. I was inspired to see that she is still pushing the 2.5 mile walk that she does to represent the 2.5 years that it took for the enslaved citizens of Texas to know that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. But I think what she represents for me is that these more difficult human-related issues do take time. And if it can happen quickly, that sometimes it can also be undone just as quickly. So for people who have lost their fervor already, I would say that they probably joined this excitement in 2021 when then President Joe Biden signed Juneteenth as a federal holiday into existence. But Dr. Lee has been working on this for 50 years.
Yes. Yes.
And Yeah, and I think it's important to know that we have these urgent matters that we have to concern ourselves with, but then we also should be thinking long term about how we're going to leave this world a better place. And I think that's necessary to keep the hope that's required when you're doing inclusivity work. At least that's what I think. I don't, you might share your perspective.
No, that is spot on, Dr. Nicole. And thank you so much for bringing to the conversation the work and the efforts of Dr. Opal Lee. And many in this community may not even be familiar with who actually was responsible for bringing to light the historical context that many of us for so much time did not even know about. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. I also had an opportunity to hear from Dr. Opal Lee recently, and it was through my city. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. That's where NWC is based. That's my hometown. And we had our Juneteenth celebration last Friday, in fact, and it was beautifully done. And while she was not able to be here in person, there was a video that was shown at the gala. It was a royal gala, and it was between her and the organizers of our Juneteenth Royal Gala celebration. And it was just beautiful to hear her talk about her pride, but also still the call to action that so much more work is yet to be done. So don't get weary. And so anyway, I love that we're able to take this moment just to engage in ways in which we have personally reflected this particular Juneteenth holiday. And I invite the rest of you in our community to do the same. If you're on LinkedIn Live, then go to the comments section. Let us know how you're planning to reflect and to acknowledge and recognize Juneteenth. Maybe you've already done it, as I have. Maybe you're still continuing to celebrate, as I am, but we want to hear from you. And then, of course, with our Zoom community here, go to the chat and let us know the same. Okay, fantastic. So I want to jump right in. And I am so intrigued by your chemical engineering background and your trajectory into now the space of leadership, inclusivity. And so I would love for you just to talk about what inspired your transition from chemical engineering into DEI leadership, and how has your engineering background influenced your approach?
Well, Dr. Nika, I think I would say three things. One, it's just important to know that I'm the sixth child of seven children with one bathroom. And being raised in that environment, you learn the importance. First of all, you know that diversity or difference is not something we get to decide if we want or we don't want.
Absolutely.
People are just different. And I got to experience that living with my siblings. And then you learn that if you can't figure out how to collaborate with people around that difference, then you don't get to take a shower when you want to. And it's a seminal part of the bias I think I hold around the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I didn't know that until I became an engineer. When I got my first engineering job, I was the only Black person in the plant who was in a salaried role. I was the only woman in the plant who was in a salaried role. I was the only person under 30 in a salary role, and I was under 25. And most people had an average tenure of 28 years at that manufacturing plant. And my mind just works differently than most engineers. And I got a chance to see that despite all of the difference you could visually observe, that the things you couldn't observe were major barriers to me being able to even convince people that my projects sometimes were worth doing. And the third thing I would say is what was astonishing to me is that when I progressed in my career to start to lead people, was that when we were assigned HR training courses going into learning and development, many times HR people would assume that you just couldn't fix engineering managers.
Mhm.
That's just how they are. And I thought that was interesting for the people who were supposed to be teaching us how to be more emotionally intelligent. And I am not judging it, I'm just describing it. But I
Mm.
found a little niche for me to be able to take a logical and reasonable approach to teaching the same content, and helping people to understand that, yes, any person can learn to be more empathetic and more inclusive and learn how to lead if they want to. Most people have the ability. And I was also shocked that when we were talking about tougher topics like racial equity, that we were pushing people into those, and I'm going to use the word pushing, that's what I mean, pushing
Mhm.
people into those discussions who had no working knowledge of diversity, inclusion, belonging. Everyone had an opinion about race, but hardly anyone had an informed opinion about things like Juneteenth, as an example. No understanding of the institutional and systemic challenges that we have here in the United States. And so I just thought about the topic in the same way that I think about engineering. You do not put someone in calculus class who has not had pre-algebra. You can,
Yes.
you can, but they will fail miserably.
Yes.
You do not
Yeah.
put someone in calculus class who, just because they're married to someone who knows calculus, or just because their grandchild knows calculus, you only put someone in calculus class because they've had the prerequisites. And so
Right.
that is what was my interest. I wasn't putting my toe into leading in the DEI space in any way. I was trying to share information that I thought would be helpful to my HR partners who were doing DEI work, to say, listen, got to prep these people first. And it's not hand holding. It's not centering whiteness. It's making sure that they at least know what the word integration means before you put them in
Right.
calculus class. And I'm still trying to push that narrative today, but whether or not I'm successful is still up for
Well, from outside
discussion.
looking in, I think that you are successful, Dr. Price. I have seen your content. And I'm very intimately familiar with your book, Spark the Heart. I have a copy myself, by the way. Dr. Price is also a fellow Forbes Books author. That's how I first became knowledgeable of who you are. And I love that you were centering this message of empathy into your work. And although, to your point, you felt as though DEI wasn't what you were set out for, I think that many of us who are practitioners in this space would say that empathy is very much at the center of the work of DEI. And so it's just a natural, connection point. But again, I want you all to be aware of Dr. Price's book. It's called Spark the Heart, Engineering Empathy in Your Organization. And so I want you all we'll place it into the chat. I want you all to make sure that you're checking that out. And it certainly gives greater context as to how, again, the question I presented, your engineering background has found its way into the work that you do now. And I love that connection point. We have to set people up for success. So the analogy that you shared about calculus and algebra is making it plain for us. And so thank you. Thank you so much. So let's talk about, and you've touched on this a little, but I want to unpack this further. But was there a pivotal moment that led you to focus on empathy in DEI work? And how did that shift happen?
Empathy is not my natural state. I think people are shocked to know that, just hearing me now. But when I was working in manufacturing and my job was kind of business transformation, people called me when things were wrong. I didn't
Yeah.
get names that were doing well. And I earned the name the Nicanator. It is a combination of my actual name, Nicole, and the Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator character. So people were comparing me to a cyborg assassin. And in
Mm,
many ways, I would say legitimately so. So empathy
mm,
was not necessarily central to the way I engaged. One of my good friends, who Tar J. Frank, would
mm.
say, I would describe you as considerate. I would describe you as helpful. Empathetic, I'm not sure that I would describe you as. But I was delivering a leadership session. It was specifically about inclusivity to some of Kansas City's wealthiest citizens. And at the end, you understand Southern hospitality. I'm not sure how much you understand Midwest nice, but around these parts, when we say something nice, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing critical coming behind it. And so I've lived here my entire life. And so I've gotten used to listening for the criticism within the compliment. And so at the
Yeah.
end, one of the leaders said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Price. That was wonderful." And so I'm listening. I'm ready.
Mhm, mhm.
because it's wonderful is, I think was
Yeah.
obvious. If I
Yeah.
might just toot my own horn, I think that part was obvious. And then he went on to say, I understand what you're telling me intellectually. I was hoping you would help me get it emotionally.
Mm.
And I sat back. I'm trying to work on pausing so I can respond instead of react to things.
Yeah.
So I pause and I go, did this man just tell me he don't care about what I just said? I think he just told me he doesn't care about everything I just said. But when I paused, I looked at everyone else's face and they had the same sentiment. And I thought to myself, somebody needs to teach these people about empathy. Like, if
Mm.
they don't care about this, if they are woefully and dangerously indifferent about this topic,
Yeah.
nothing I tell them is going to work, right? I can
Yes.
teach all day, right? And so I set about trying to figure out whose empathy book I was going to put in front of people. But remember, the folks that I talk to tend to be more logical, reasonable, less empathetic and compassionate. They're not typically going to go to global empathy circles. In fact, they're not doing any of that. They have KPIs they need to meet, and they need a different reason to engage in this conversation. And so it kept coming back to me. You need to be the one. You are not naturally empathetic. And so, how about you be the one to teach people? And through that process, I learned that there were 5 different types of empathy, and pretty much there's some of them cannot be taught. But cognitive empathy, or the mental ability to understand or put yourself in another person's shoes, that can be taught. And
Mm.
so I start pulling together parts of other people's work that I thought were helpful. But Chris Voss, the hostage negotiator, coined a term called tactical empathy.
Huh?
And what I think is beautiful about it is that I then started to realize that I grew up around people who knew tactical empathy very well. I lived across the street as a child from a pimp. And it occurred to me that in order to get someone to sell their body and give you their money, even when you don't treat them well, you have to be able to understand them. You have to understand what they think, feel, and believe in order to be able to get them to do what you want. And I was first mortified because I thought, wow, the people who are embracing empathy as a tactical strategy are mostly manipulators.
Mm.
How do we get cognitive empathy, mental
Mm-hmm.
empathy? How
Mm-hmm.
effectively emotionally feeling what other people feel? That's not going to address systemic oppression.
Yeah,
That will make
exactly.
people nicer to each other. That will help people have peaceful environments, but that is not going to create a liberated society. It's
Yeah.
just not. And so I set about putting together a resource, Spark the Heart, to say, what would it look like if we truly understood the people in the middle, the people who are dangerously indifferent, the people who are influenceable? What if we weren't focused on the hateful, the most hateful in our society? And what if we were able to mobilize the people who are just silent, either because they don't know, either or because they have great shame? And let's be clear, ashamed adults are not learning adults.
Right.
So how can I understand those people enough so that I can speak to them in ways that resonate with them? And that's purely, um, for me, my engineering background. You cannot improve a process if you don't understand what is occurring or what's happening. And so
Mm.
when you say, are you suggesting that I'm more empathetic to people who are hateful or oppressive or have all the isms? And I in that moment know that they're talking about effective empathy. You want me to feel with them. And I'm going, no,
Yeah.
the hostage negotiator is understanding because he wants you to release the hostages.
Yeah, exactly. There's a goal there. Yeah.
There's the goal there. And
Yeah.
so how do we use cognitive empathy? Those of us who care deeply about creating a sense of belonging and
Yeah.
workplaces that are inclusive, how do we practice this same type of tactical empathy in order to create a more inclusive workplace where everyone feels like they can thrive. And that was my goal.
Yeah. That's so refreshing to hear. It's been refreshing to read and hear you bring this and amplify this way of helping people to lean more into this work of inclusivity. And there's so much I can say about it. I want to unpack some of what you just shared, because a lot of it I don't want this audience to miss. First of all, you shared ashamed adults are not learning adults. That is so true. I also can recognize, I resonate deeply with how you describe yourself with your engineering background, because as part of my top 5, number 1 is maximizer for strength finders.
Me
And that
too.
is, oh my gosh. And so we'll talk about this later, but let me just plant the seed right now. As I was reading your bio, as I'm thinking about all and taking in that you're sharing, there's so many similarities that we have that it's kind of scary. So we need to kind of talk about that offline. But there's so many ways in which we are connected, even like, the adult learning for your master's, and then the organizational leadership and management, all of that. That was my path as well. But here's what I want to say. Because I am a maximizer, I can be, I know I am. I'm going to own it because I know this about myself. And I think there's something to be said about normalizing that self-reflection and self-awareness, because without that, we can't grow. I know that I'm very task oriented. I know that I'm very much a finisher. That's why I'm number 1 is maximizer. And so in that, I have to work incredibly hard to exercise my empathy muscle, because I can naturally be so much more focused on getting it done, right? And so I love the fact that when you knew that about yourself, you said, I need to teach it because I need to learn how to sit with this, right? And I'm not finding anything out there that really is designed in a way that I think is going to be most effective to drive this message home. And so I love that. When you talk also about how your intended audience with this message is about those who are passive, they are kind of on the fence, but they can be persuaded. They can be brought along. I often talk about how my audience with this work is not those who have dug their heels in, pretty deeply and firmly to say, I want to stay in this place of believing that inequities and disparities are appropriate. And that's not my audience. I don't think they can be moved, at least not by me. And so I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm not setting myself up for success for the work that I care deeply about. So we're so aligned there. When you talked about how feeling alone does not necessarily liberate society, it doesn't. But what I'm also hearing is that if we can connect to the emotional aspect of people, there is greater propensity that through those feelings and those emotions, they become more aware and maybe even more motivated to be driven towards some type of action, right? Because oftentimes the action that we, will attach ourselves to has a lot to do with how we have felt about what we've been exposed to. And I think that's important. It's also why I think that storytelling is such a big aspect of this work, because when we are telling stories, we are getting proximate to people's lived experiences. We're healing those feel words, and we are deepening our compassion and our ability to feel with people. And when we do that, I think there's a greater chance for us to act as allies and really try to do our part. And so anyway, I just wanted to just unpack at least what was coming up for me as I heard you share so much goodness and that last scene. So if this is resonating with you all in our audience, please go to the chat, go to the comment section of LinkedIn Live. Let us know what's coming up for you, because this is super, super good for me. Okay, I want to go to our next question. Considering the significant changes in both the engineering industry and the broader society understanding of DEI over the years, how have you adapted your message and strategies to remain impactful and relevant?
If I'm permission to be vulnerable here, Dr. Nika, I
Yes.
earlier this year was feeling like I had to maybe remove the acronym DEI from everything I was doing, because it has been um, just considered a dirty word,
Yeah.
and has um, but what I had to remember was that when I started my firm, people weren't all that interested in the topic then.
Yeah.
And we're not that old. We're only 8 years old. But in 2016, people were saying we were in a post-racial society.
Yeah.
Uh, where they weren't interested in talking about race equity. They weren't talking about diversity and inclusion. It was the catalyst of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, while we were also in a global pandemic, that sparked this interest in this topic. And I had forgotten that that's not where we've always been anyway.
Yeah.
This,
Yeah.
this system is not designed this way by accident. It is actually very purposeful. And to be able to dismantle a system and create something that works better for everyone, that's not going to be easy because
Mhm.
it's designed to be that way. And so
Yeah.
what I have personally done is decided that when I use the word diversity, that I'm also going to say different. So you might recognize that when I
Yeah.
talked about siblings, we are very different people. That is diversity. And
Yeah.
I don't allow people to think that somehow they are the norm and everyone else is different from them. No, if you get any two people together, there's difference present. And I try to use that language instead of the word, because
Yeah.
I know that now that feels like putting people in a calculus class and they don't have pre-op. Back
There
up.
you go.
You know, I try to back up and meet people where they are. If you don't like the word equity, then I use fairness, because equity is nothing more but it's just fairness. That's what it is. And
Mhm.
when I ask leaders to think about what their values are, and I usually start there.
Yeah.
Tell me that you value unfairness, and then you and I can have a conversation about why inequity is okay with you. But if you
Mhm.
value fairness, my job is to help every leader I meet align themselves to the values that they say they believe in every single day. And I have not had to pivot away from that. What is more true is that people are not acting in accordance with their values when they are saying or suggesting that teams are homogenous, because we know that we are not that smart when
Yeah.
our teams are homogenous. One of my favorite books in the space is called The Next IQ by Dr. Erin Reeves. This sister is amazing, and she gives case study after case study after case study of how when you have a wide range of people, Dr. Nika, me just knowing you makes me smarter. I have reached out to you to ask you questions about things you know. You have also
Likewise.
recently, as this week, reached out to me to ask me about things I know. We might look like we are exactly the same, but you and I have very different lived experiences too, that
Yes.
make each other smarter, and we don't have to follow the same just difficult path because we know each other. And so that is one of the ways that I've just tried to get people to re-engage in this work, for the people who are already engaged in the work and now they feel afraid to let people know they are.
Yeah.
My job is to help remind them, hey, what were the outcomes you got when we were focused on making sure that all types of differences in your organization were being valued? Because leadership,
Mhm.
effective leadership, is inclusive.
Absolutely.
Who wants to not get all of the benefit out of their team members? That makes no logical sense. That makes no capitalistic sense. That is not good business sense. And so I just remind people of what they already know. And like you, for the people who cannot be converted, I say, who needs God when they got me? I am not the superhero, right? My
Right.
job is not to try to
Right.
save everyone. Some people need a pivotal, life-changing experience. I can't give them that. But let me tell you what, you let someone have a child with special needs and that child's needs are not being met in school. And now I have a person who's ready to be an advocate for children with special needs who may not have cared about that topic before, but I didn't give it to them.
Yeah.
They had to have their own personal experience. And so I trust that somebody somewhere is handling that, because let me tell you, in my global empathy circle, when I suggested that I was only working with the people who were influenceable, I was encouraged to learn more about Daryl Davis. And if you don't know who Daryl Davis is, he's actually a musician, but he's also a Black man who is trying to convert Ku Klux Klan members into, being more inclusive and loving and all those things.
Yeah.
I I think what the man is doing is fantastic. It's just not my
Hmm.
work. Not my work.
Yeah,
I
absolutely. Yeah.
I would be too stressed to go to a Ku Klux Klan rally to try to get someone to convert to, read their mission statement. My mission statement needs to be aligned with your mission statement, and now we can work from there. But I leave the people on the fringes. They are not willing. They are not able. Daryl Davis can have it. I think he's fantastic. And when I'm talking about empathy, that is not what I am talking about. I am talking
Yeah.
about understanding someone who's scared, someone who is feeling left out, someone who might be misinformed. Many people are misinformed, especially
Yeah.
about issues for which they just have not been exposed. I can persuade those people.
Yeah. Breaking
So
through that fear
that's
and discomfort is necessary. Uh,
yes,
so, so Daryl Davis, by the way, if I know the CNN did like a documentary, and sometimes they resurface it, but it is a really fascinating story, and I appreciate you bringing to the conversation that each of us that are in this work and we care deeply about this work, we have different styles, different approaches, and different superpowers that may reach certain audiences. And so, like you, I never place judgment around how someone may go about, doing this work because we need all of us in order to bring everyone along. And I think
yeah,
that to your point, yeah, I could not do what Daryl Davis does either, but we need him, and he has been effective in some regards. I mean, he talks about those
yeah.
stories, and so let's not
There's a
forget that.
whole
I also
movie.
want to whole movie, and I don't want to forget the other resource that you referenced. It was Next IQ. Give us the name of that book again, and then the author, and we're going to place it into the chat for those that may be interested.
Yes, the Next IQ, and Dr. Aaron Reeves is Arin Reeves. Um, she's a lawyer, so the book is written like she's a lawyer, but the scenarios that she provides, if you know that you're working with people who need more data, more case studies, she has given a plethora of case studies in that book about how she talks about it just like it's, don't you want to be smarter? Don't you want to be smarter?
Yeah. And who says no to that, right? And so then there's an entry point.
Yes.
There's an entry point. Yeah, there's an entry point to be able to engage. No, I love that. Something else that you said that really resonated with me as well when you were talking about using the word difference. I mean, and if we look up diversity, it really does state that it is a point of respect in which things differ. And what I often share with people when we are really unpacking what diversity is, what it's not, because we have to unlearn some misinformation as well. It's always important to enter the word difference. And it's also important to make sure that people understand that it is not about classifying diversity as right, wrong, good or bad, inferior, superior, but it is about seeing it as just different, right? And I think that's part of where the conflict and the division come in, is that we start to classify difference as right, wrong, good, or bad, and we should not. And so, yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. I want to shift and give this audience an opportunity to think about some questions or curiosities that could be surfacing for you, because we will be giving you a chance to present your questions and your comments to Dr. Price. You can do so if you're part of our Zoom community by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that we can call on you. And if your camera is on, then we will add you to the spotlight for you to share directly. If not, certainly go to the chat and we will present those questions on your behalf. If you're on LinkedIn Live, then we encourage you to put your questions and comments into the comment section, and we will definitely try to bring that into the discussion as well. I'm going to give you a moment or two to percolate on what curiosities are coming up while I go to the next question, and then hopefully we'll see some willing folks to share. Okay, so I want to talk about the fact that in 2 weeks, you have a scheduled keynote that you're given. You give a lot of keynotes. I shared that when I read your bio. And this is at the IAAP conference in New York. And so can you give us a sneak peek into what you'll be discussing and what key takeaways that you want the audience to walk away with?
Yes, this is the Administrative Professionals Conference, and what I love about them is that oftentimes they are in the room and they get a good sense for the lay of the land. What are executives thinking? What are they talking about? How are policies being created? And too often they are silent because they don't step into the power of what difference they provide, because it's often also the administrative assistant, the chief of staff, the executive assistant who does have a perspective because they are hearing everything from everyone. But what makes them so good at their roles is that they do play their positions. And my task to them is to step out of the shadows and step into their power and their ability, not on all things, but using the words of Dr. Lee, being a committee of one and deciding
committee of one.
on certain things. When I am asked for my position, I am going to share, because I might be the only person to tell my executive that the emperor has no clothes. You are sometimes only trusted colleague,
Yes.
there with them. And so I'm super excited to be with them, because I believe that they have more power than they realize in some cases to be able to speak up and on, however comfortable you feel. You might decide that that's not always, but when you can do, it's interesting. The Kansas City International Airport just recently opened a new terminal. And in that terminal, there are all gender restrooms. And was an assistant who made a comment to the primary project leader to say two things. One, when we're at home, our bathrooms are all gender. And two, she shared a story about trying to travel with her parents, and they are older, and she wants to be able to go into a stall with great privacy to help her dad.
Yeah.
And in those situations, these single gender binary bathrooms are not helpful. And so when Kansas City rolled out the information about the bathrooms, that you don't have to look under the stall to see if somebody is there. In fact, you can't look under the stall because they're all very private. We have these, it's a very private experience. They shared, what about the mom who has a 6-year-old son, so maybe a little too old to go into the bathroom with you, but you don't want to go to the family bathroom.
Right.
And these situations where you're talking about your taking care of your parents, it broadens. Now, why do we absolutely need this? Because I believe in liberatory design, where you design for the people who need it the most. Of course, trans people need these all gendered bathrooms the most. But if you can speak to people in a way that they understand, then how can we help them understand how more inclusive bathrooms are helpful to far more people than you realize?
Right.
And there's hardly any pushback about those bathrooms because of an assistant deciding to speak up and say, I could use that with me and my dad. And that's going to be my primary message when I'm with them on July 13th. And I couldn't be more thrilled about it.
I love that. And I love that you have the opportunity, and what a treat it will be for those in attendance. But it reminds me of Angela Glover, how she talks about the zero sum game, right? While we may present it as this is being initiated because we're really trying to accommodate appropriately for certain communities, there's vast number of benefits to all of us. And so highlighting that, I think, certainly helps to break through the clutter that sometimes people can cause people to sit on the sidelines and really not engage in that type of conversation. So I love that. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, which is fine, because I have more questions for you. And so we have maybe a little bit over 10 minutes left. And I want to talk about your testament to the power of continuous learning and growth. As someone who has contributed significantly to the conversation on leadership, empathy, and DEI, what are you currently reading, or where do you get some of your inspiration from that shows up into these talks that you give, like the one on July 19th that's coming up, and many of the others that you've already done?
What I think is most appropriate, because June is Pride Month, is to talk about reading fiction. So I never used to read fiction because I had so much nonfiction work to read. You know how this goes. I had to read your book because you read my book, and there's so much to learn about race equity. There's so much to learn about disabilities and all of the people that we're trying to advocate for, that I just didn't feel like I had time to read fiction. But I had a
Yeah.
major personal event, and my therapist assigned me fiction. He said, listen, you need to read some fiction so that you can relax a little bit. And
Mm.
so I don't know that I picked the best fiction books. I started reading serial killer novels like The Bone Collector. And but I also remembered that I loved Jodi Picoult. And she wrote one of my favorite books, fiction books on just like race, equity, and inclusivity, called Small Great Things. But
Mm.
it's Pride Month, and my book club was reading a book called Mad Honey. And in Mad Honey, this is not giving it away. I think it just helps. But the primary character, one of the primary characters, is actually a trans person. And you learn so much about the experience of a trans person that my heart, that my empathy muscle was drastically built. And as I was doing my research on empathy, what I was most surprised by is that reading fiction helps to build our empathy muscle on a topic. And I don't know that I would have found my way to a fiction book about a trans person before learning that, because I probably would have just
Mhm.
reached out to people who have real experiences.
Right.
But me being lost in this narrative, walking through the world as a trans person and learning like what the surgery was like, and how you can't tell unless you're a doctor, and sometimes even doctors can't tell, and how everything functions, it was helpful to me. And I didn't realize what I didn't know, which also helps me to further understand many of my clients who are very ignorant about certain topics. And how did I, in a safe space, learn all about these very intimate details of a trans person's experience
Yeah.
without being intrusive or invasive? And now, honey, you can't tell me nothing about the topic, which can also be dangerous. But um, Bad Honey is what I just finished reading. And then right before that was another fiction book called Remarkably Bright Creatures. I had a random DNA discovery in 2022. So people who follow me probably do know about this. And there's a DNA discovery in this book about an octopus named Marcellus. And I think if anyone needs to build their empathy muscles around ancestry DNA, or, what different family structures could look like, I recommend that one as well. And I see we've got a raised hand from a Tracy.
We do. Tracy France. I'm gonna invite Tracy to prepare to unmute herself and to share. I wanna just make a quick comment though before we do so. So first of all, again, I'm discovering all of these similarities. I love serial killer. It's I don't tell me I have no idea what that says about me. But I do. I love things like that. I mostly engage in those types of content through like video, like shows, television. But I love the fact that you brought up how fiction has also helped you to deepen your learning and your understanding, because I'm one of those practitioners that I believe we need all the things, all the different modalities and the different ways people can learn, because people learn and receive information in different ways. And so whatever it takes to like bring people along, whatever we need to do, we need to make sure that we're putting all those tools into the toolbox. And so if that works for you, that's great. And as you were talking about the book that you read with the transgender content, we recently had AC Folks on the Intentional Conversations podcast, and he is the author of transgender inclusion. And not only does he share his own personal story, but he also helps to break down some of the curiosities that many people have, but they just are afraid to ask about. And so I just thought, again, in the spirit of LGBTQI Pride Month, to be able just to share that with this community. So go back and check that podcast out if you haven't already. Okay, Tracy, I'm going to add you to our spotlight and allow you to present your question, your comments. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the session, the discussion. I want to make a comment and then I want to ask a question. So when you were talking, Dr. Price, what came to mind when you were talking about empathy and generating that emotion, I thought about the line in the Boys in the Hood movie where he said, either they don't know don't show or they don't care what's going on in the hood. That Ice Cube line at the end. That's what just came to my mind. But I wanted to know, you mentioned 5 types of empathy. I was not familiar with the 5 types. I'm familiar with at least 3 types. So do you have resources or references for that? And I also wanted to ask you about the shame part, because you said that adults who are shamed can't learn. Sometimes practitioners are not intending to shame people, but it's just a visceral emotion that comes up as you're telling somebody that they have privilege, or things surface about topics like that that makes people feel shamed, and it's not on the part of the presenter or facilitator. Do you have any particular techniques that you've used to help kind of get them past their discomfort and into enlightenment? Thank
Oh,
you.
Tracy, thank you so much for both of those questions. I'll start with the last one and I'll go backwards. So one strategy that I use that I think all practitioners should adopt, and it's just my opinion, for things that I know tend to make people feel shame or guilt, I give it to them in pre-work so that they can process their own emotions, talk to their therapist, whomever they need, so that they can center themselves and come to our sessions. So the discussions in the sessions are usually about everyone's reaction to the content, but most of the difficult learning happens outside the session. So as an example, I've got one of my colleagues, Madeline Johnson, is a woman with a trans experience. And Madeline meets with teams who have a team member who is transitioning. And it is a very private meeting where people get to ask whatever questions they want to ask, where they can make all of their ignorant faux pas with Madeline, so that when we are together, people don't have to think about those kinds of things. There's one exercise in particular that I think is well-meaning, but it is shame-inducing for both people in majority groups and people who are underrepresented. And it's the privilege exercise, where you step forward if you have the newspaper, you step backwards if you have one parent. If you pay attention to the emotions in the room, the people who tend to be at the front of the room feel guilt, and the people at the back of the room tend to feel shame. And then I ask you, when people are feeling those two emotions, what are they learning? So how can we give people a video of watching that exercise before the training session, so that they can process all their emotions around it? And then when we come to the training session, we can talk about, what does that mean? What does it look like to be able to create more equitable environment based on the different positions of where people would be, versus having to stand there and look at your colleagues in these very different points in the room. So that is an example, Tracy, of one of the strategies that I use. So I do a lot of level setting before people get to the session. The other thing I do is I ask people, and I'll just share these 2 strategies. I have a series of what is the equivalent of 3 sessions that go together. And in the first session, I ask people to set aside their racial identity, not because racial identity is not important. We have an entire session focused on race. I have them set aside their racial identity because race is emotionally charged and intellectually challenging. It causes the most amount of shame and discontent. And so we talk about difference in that very first session, like pre-algebra. It is a difference of thought, difference in communication style. I talk about how introverts are oppressed in this country, so that people can get a sense for the language. So then when we start talking about oppressive systems in healthcare, in banking and lending, and criminal justice, people can understand what it has felt like to be oppressed in less high stakes situations. So those are my 2 primary methods. Now, the 5 types of empathy, I go through all 5 of them in great detail in Spark the Heart, but the one that people tend to not know about is somatic empathy. That's the empathy you feel in your body. There are people who can watch people get punched just fine with no problem. And then there are those of us, even when we know it's a fake punch, I just watched Bad Boys 4, and throughout the whole movie, I was like, you bite a lemon and my mouth waters. That's actually somatic empathy. That is feeling in your body what another person is experiencing. It's not you that bit the lemon, but everyone doesn't have that type of empathy. People do not distinguish between emotional empathy and mental empathy. So if you're happy and I know what it feels like to be happy and I feel happy because you feel happy, that's effective empathy. And it works wonderful when things are good. But if you think about caretakers, nurses, school teachers, when it's bad, we don't have very much capacity to be able to help each other if I'm consistently feeling the negative emotions of working in a trauma center all day or a domestic violence shelter as an example. And that's where burnout happens, because my goal is to help you. But then the longer I feel pain, literally feeling, I'm thinking about the time when I was abused, or I'm thinking about the time when my dad died, or I'm thinking about, all of these things. And what's interesting about it is that most people that are drawn to trauma work tend to be doing so because they have had that trauma.
Right.
So they're reliving it emotionally. That is effective empathy. Hard to teach. Very, very hard to teach. People usually get it through lived experience. But cognitive empathy or mental empathy is me understanding that whatever another person thinks, feels, or believes, it makes total sense to them. I don't have to agree, but through that understanding, I can then move. Those are the two most common ones. But I also coined a term called radical empathy, and it has been in response to, there are people who are amazingly empathetic until you're not in their group. So I might empathize with other Black women and their situations, but let you be a gay man, and then now all of a sudden I don't have any empathy for you. Radical empathy is empathizing with people who are drastically different from you. And the science would say that we tend not to have, not only do we not have empathy when someone's different from us, we tend to assign nefarious or negative characteristics to those people as well. And then there's compassionate empathy. Because of what I understand, am motivated to help you. And that's the fifth type that I share and talk about.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I see in the chat that you placed on feverishly taking notes. And so I'm glad that you found the information Dr. Price just delivered to be really useful to you. I know it was useful to me as well. We are out of time, but I want to thank this community for showing up, for engaging in this wonderful dialogue. We did place into the chat Dr. Price's website. So we hope that you will take advantage of connecting with her, get her book, Spark the Heart. And we really do appreciate being able to hold space and time for this community. I want to give you 15 seconds to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you, Dr. Price.
Dr. Nika, thank you so much for having me with you today. It has been my absolute pleasure. And I just want to let everyone know, I want to center Dr. Opal Lee's words this week, and that we all can decide to become a community of one, fiercely focused on changing something for the better, because I feverishly believe that each one of us can be the spark of an empathy revolution through the spaces where we live, in our cities, and possibly even this entire country. And I'm expecting that more people are going to join me on this empathy revolution.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much. Well stated.